Yes, we wore silly clothes. Yes, we sang songs about material that was hundreds of years out of date. But it was while I was in that choir, the ultimate surround sound, that haunting, rich, emotion-stirring sound, that experience spawned what has turned out to be a lifelong passion, intrigue, curiosity for the mechanics of musical harmony. In 1972, I was 6 years old and I had been playing my piano for a good few months, and I built up a little repertoire of songs that I like to play, and I played for about an hour every day. I wasn't losing interest, but it was all starting to plateau a little bit. I mean, what I really needed was a piano teacher. However, being the early 1970s, nobody had any money. I couldn't claim any peer pressure from my friends. Nobody else I knew had piano lessons. And in fact, I was playing my piano with whatever tuning it had retained from its bumpy journey to my house. There was no money to have the piano tuned. So what I needed was an option to get some free music theory tuition somehow. My school did not offer piano lessons at all. They didn't even let anybody touch the piano apart from the teachers. And so they did offer a wide range of musical instrument tuition though, namely cello or violin. I didn't fancy carrying a cello to school once a week, so I opted for violin. I was allocated an instrument and shared a slot with the peripatetic teacher, along with 2 or 3 other pupils. And, well, at first it was quite a novelty. We scraped our way through a few little tunes. I got out of English lessons, that was good. But it's quite a learning curve for a 6-year-old. And it wasn't long before I was turning up for lessons, and I'd not touched my violin the entire week since the previous lesson. Another option, join a choir, join a church choir. I mean, in the centre of town was a large Church of England church. Presumably they had a choir. However, the problem was it was about a 40-minute walk to that church, and being a member of a choir is a commitment of at least a couple of visits a week. So, however, the Church of England did have a little satellite church near the castle, and that was about 10 minutes away from where I lived. So maybe that church had a choir. Well, some phone calls were made, and Thursdays, 7 o'clock, come along for choir practice for 1 hour. So the following Thursday I did. I was taken to the church. I mean, I'd never been in a church before. It didn't look very promising. It had a large, overgrown graveyard. And as was considered normal in the 1970s, I was just left there to fend for myself for an hour in the hands of a group of strangers. The church itself, it had massive thick stone walls, a bell tower. Inside there were stone statues with their noses broken off, and the smell of wood polish and all that sort of thing. The actual choir was about 25 people. I was the youngest by a good few years, but there were other children and teenagers, adults. There was even a man called Bernard in his mid-70s who told me that he had been a member of that choir for that very choir for 65 years, implicitly laying down the challenge to me to beat his loyalty and longevity. Anyway, I quickly realized that there were other benefits to being a member of this choir. We got to go on outings, we got taken to the theatre in Wolverhampton, we entered competitions. So it was all good stuff. Once a year, we got to go to the nearby cathedral in Lichfield, because their choir took their annual 1 week off. And so we were asked to come as their replacement. And this was an indication that this choir that I joined was actually quite well respected. I told my friends at school about it. I mean, they weren't particularly impressed until I explained to them that local radio come and visit the church and broadcast our singing. Well, upon this news, one of my friends joined immediately and 2 other boys joined almost straight away. I mean, this was tantamount to being famous to get to sing on the radio. I would say that the highlight of the events was the Christmas Eve midnight candlelit carol service. And for that event, the church was consistently packed. And that's what you would expect. I mean, we have this rich tradition of carols, and of course people want to come out and have a good sing on a Christmas Eve. On Saturdays, we were required to sing for weddings. However, for weddings, we got paid. Now, I'm going to use what used to be an inflation-proof currency of the Mars bar. And to sing for a wedding, we got paid 3 Mars bars. Now, unfortunately, shrinkflation has meant that what was a regular Mars bar then is now labelled a king-size Mars bar. There was one particular Saturday when we sang for 5 weddings in succession. So we had a real production line going. And so that's a 30-minute ceremony, 15 minutes to get the previous lot out, which is normally a matter of persuading the photographer to get everybody over the other end of the graveyard. That just about leaves time to get the next party in and for the bride to be the fashionable 2 minutes late, rinse and repeat. However, don't go thinking that that was lucrative enough for me to fund my piano lessons. It certainly wasn't. That record Saturday of 5 weddings would actually only pay for one 40-minute piano lesson with a teacher. One of the weddings, I spotted the family that donated their piano to me, and I did approach them afterwards, though quite understandably they were more interested in checking how their daughter's wedding photographs were going than listening to some random little boy who claimed to be the owner of their ex-piano. So, did being in a choir meet its objectives? Did I learn music theory? Well, no, not at all. The problem was that at my school, we used something called the initial teaching alphabet, which is somebody's brilliant idea to replace the normal English alphabet with a phonetic alphabet. And that worked absolutely fine for all of the books that were on the shelves at school and for all of the posters that were on the walls at school. But in the outside world, I could make head nor tail of regular English. So the words that were in the book that I was holding, I couldn't understand them. But it wasn't a problem because I just listened to the other choristers, and over time I learnt all of the words because I could hear what they were singing. However, that also meant that I picked up the melody at the same time. And so the book I was holding was actually just for ornamental purposes only. So no, I learnt nothing of music theory in that time. So why am I telling you this? Well, yes, we wore silly clothes. Yes, we sang songs about material that was hundreds of years out of date. But it was while I was in that choir, the ultimate surround sound, that haunting, rich, emotion-stirring sound, that experience spawned what has turned out to be a lifelong passion, intrigue, curiosity for the mechanics of musical harmony. At school, we sang in assembly. I was used to singing amongst other people, but that wasn't harmony. That was just everybody singing in unison. At choir practice, I got to hear the four parts deconstructed. We would start with the soprano, and I quickly got the idea that yes, the soprano line is the identity of the piece of music. And we would then add the bass, and I could hear that the bass always seemed obvious to me. But I mean, I wouldn't have known the terminology at the time, but the bass was determining the chord. The bass was determining the inversion of the chord. The tenor line, well, I think if you twisted anybody's arm and forced them to harmonize a melody, they would probably come up with something. They'd come up with something like let's go inside. They would come up with something like the tenor line. Most people would sing a third above or a fourth above the melody, or because tenor's usually sung by male voices, then that equates to a fifth or a sixth below the melody. That then left the remaining part, the scavenging note catcher of last resort, which is the alto. The alto line always sounded totally unintuitive. It sounded like nothing that anybody would ever want to sing. And it never sounded complete. It would often finish on the fifth of the chord. So I actually grew some admiration for the altos, and the altos really did need to be able to read music because there was nothing you could guess about the alto line. I think the interest in harmony is also what caused violin to fail for me. Because I wanted to render harmony, the violin is a monophonic instrument. I needed a polyphonic instrument to render harmony. So that's what killed my interest in it. So that was the choir. I mean, that would be the end of this story, except that I would add that one particular Thursday, the arrangement was made as usual, 8 o'clock, go to the front door and meet Dad, which is what I did. Then when he arrived, he had a look on his face, a pained look on his face, and I could see something was wrong. He just came straight out with it. Paul, I've got some rather sad news for you. Nana Wells has died. Well, I'd never lost a relative before. At that point, I remembered feeling really rather overcome. I looked out across the graveyard. I thought, poor Nana, she's now one of these people, not going to move again, not going to do anything again. We went back home. Clearly, Dad had been in the middle of making a series of phone calls, and he continued doing that, obviously letting friends and family know. In the days that followed, my household got very, very busy. Obviously, there were funeral arrangements to make, and our neighbours from number 3 kindly, number 3, that was the family that had the piano with numbers written on the keys. They kindly offered to let me stay with them for a couple of nights, basically to just get me out of the way. And the funeral happened, and then in the weeks that followed, there was the execution of my grandmother's will. My grandmother, she'd been employed for her skills in numeracy. I don't know exactly what she did, which was quite remarkable in an era of sexism. She held a driving license. She ran a car. She was not a wealthy woman, but she certainly wasn't a poor woman either. And she had left most of her possessions to be split between her 2 sons, my dad, my uncle. But a small section of the money was to be divided and shared between her 5 grandchildren. And what this meant was I now had an amount of money which you wouldn't ordinarily quantify in Mars bars. Basically, I could afford piano lessons for the next 2 years. And that's exactly what I spent the money on. And I'll tell you all about how that transpired. I'll tell you how that worked out anyway in the next video. Bye for now.